And Emily and I were just talking before you guys joined us. This is the first time where I struggled a little bit in terms of focus, just because I feel like there's so much to talk about. I'm struggling a little to narrow it down. So I'm looking to you guys to help me this week. If you want to also add in the chat, is there anything really pressing on your mind that you want us to dive into today? We will do our best, because there's just been so many conversations and so many articles. Last week we had a really wonderful conversation around anti-racist schools and how we can keep that, what does it mean to be trauma informed, in making sure that we're addressing racial trauma when we're talking about trauma, and that we're addressing systemic issues in our conversations. And that was just a really wonderful conversation. And there's been things that have popped up. I love this question. What do people want school back to normal when normal wasn't working? Yes, exactly. That's one of the reasons that I started this conversation. All these things that we've been mulling over the last few weeks, where have been problems that we've had for a long time. And I really am very optimistic about this as an opportunity to think about those things differently, and really brainstorm together on how to make that happen. All right, Emily.
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying in terms of there's been so much that's flying around, in terms of writings and ponderings and activism around the dismantling white supremacy culture. And it's definitely, excuse me, it's definitely something that, like, I'm still in the process of myself becoming more informed, having more language. Like, I just feel like I haven't, like, when I read things, I'm like, it's kind of like this whole movement, to be honest with you. It's like another aha, like, oh, right, that's what it was that I was seeing or experiencing, but I didn't have the words for. So for me, it's kind of been a beautiful evolution. And even though prior to, like, it being such a big thing that's happening for all of us right now, it was always a piece of the work, but I feel like it makes the work so much more, in many ways, I think it gives even more context for the work and more of a vibrancy to our work, and so anyways, I've been nerding out big time with Rasma Menachem's work, because I'm just naturally drawn to him and his work and the way he approaches and thinks about these things, because he is a somatic experiencing practitioner. And so I love his languaging around that, because this makes so much sense to me. He talks about body-centered healing, and that actually the conversations need to move away from us just having these intellectual dialogues, and to really talk about, like, what we're carrying around in our bodies, the biases that are, like, in our bodies. And for people that are Black or people that are of color, that they have their own narratives written into their body experiences. And so I don't know. I don't know if other people are, like, also finding themselves really drawn to that perspective. Because I do sort of wonder if, when we intellectualize the discussion around racism, if we lose some people in that. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder, and we also kind of lose our vulnerability about it when we talk more about, like, what's coming up in terms of sensations, or what we notice when we see certain things or hear certain things. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just kind of, as you can see, I'm still organizing my own thoughts around all of this, but he's offering a free e-course, and I just can't recommend it enough. It's on his website.
And we'll put his name and the book Grandmother's Hands into the chat so that you guys can see it. He just did an interview podcast with I'll think of it. Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. It was so phenomenal. Plus I also just love her, but it was really quite excellent. And so I appreciate that he's sharing some of his resources for free of charge as well. I have his website right here. I'll pull it up. I don't know, but I'd be curious what other people think, or what's like resonating for other people right now, whose voices.
Get some interesting things in the chat popping up. I'm just trying to look through them. So one thread is around, still thinking about real practically, how can a lot of the school support staff that are often in these conversations with us that get the importance of SEL when we return, what's their in? Like, how can they influence the return to school plan with that highlighted? So what are some strategies that we might be able to think about helping them think through? And then kind of along the lines that you were just talking about, Emily, folks struggling with this conversation around race and social justice at schools, both how do we help? If teachers want to talk about it, parents may not want teachers to talk about it. And a good question, like Janice echoed what he was saying, how can white teachers make an impact without seeming like they're just jumping on board? How do they enter the conversation? That's also, yeah, and people are very concerned about school budgets right now.
Well, I mean, I think, this is tough stuff. I mean, the thing about it is I think it's okay for people to just jump right in right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have to forgive themselves or allow themselves that sort of leeway right now, because it's just, this is the moment in time. This is what this is about, in my opinion. This is our moment in time. This is the time to jump in if you haven't before. And, to not in some ways get on board allows what we've been dealing with to persist. So in every, whenever we talk about matters of social justice in schools, we're kind of going out on a limb, whether you're talking about, politics, or you're talking about, the history of our country, or you're talking about, people are going to have their own individual perspectives on things. But I think that as a country, we need to heed sort of the sentiment of the many. So like there's been a couple different polls that have been done, which is essentially that have reflected that more than 80% of the population right now is supporting the George Floyd protests and supporting what's happening. And that's pretty significant, given that usually we're like 50-50 in this country. So I see there being more support for this than there ever has been, for sure. And I think that we have to be willing to enter the arena of discomfort and the arena of potential criticism and pushback. But that's kind of the argument that the Black Lives Matter movement is making. Like, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be pushback, and there's probably going to be backlash in different ways as well. But that's true of anything that's trying to further equity.
Yeah,
including trauma-informed work. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like Adrienne, I like what you just said. There's always chaos in the storm. And Janice, yes, I totally get what you're saying. And I think that it's a great point to bring up, because I think whether people may not want to say that might be what's holding them back, but how do we encourage that people just jump in regardless?
And I see, sorry.
Go ahead.
I see Janice's comment too, but you know what I'm seeing a lot, Janice, which is encouraging to me, is, and I'm hearing it within my own family as well, is that Black people want white people to take up the conversation. They're tired. They're tired of trying to explain it from their perspective, and they feel like they need allies in white people to take up the narrative and to carry it forward. And that because whites have held the power, there's really no way in which to shift that without us doing our work as well. So that's what I'm seeing, and that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm going with. Like, okay, I'm directly being called to do this. It's not to the extinction or the extinguishing of someone else's voice or a person that's Black, but it's them asking me as a white person, do your part, speak the truth, you know.
Yep.
I know you're not advocating nothing. I know you're not.
But I think that fear comes up for people for sure. And the conversations that we were having this morning, we also saw, Emily and I both saw a great article from, I think maybe it was CNN, advocating again 90 days of play when we go back to school.
Right, Chris?
You know,
Right,
90 days of focusing on relationships and regulation and connection.
I'm happy to share the link to that article.
Yeah. And just, I think everyone that comes to these meetings and conversations gets why that's important. So what are some strategies that people have used or ideas that they have? How can we share this with the folks that are creating our plans right now? Chris. Oh, hold on. We got to unmute you. Jen is helping me.
Got it.
There we go. Nope. She's still muted. Hang on.
Are you able to unmute it?
Let me try. Oh, there she goes. There it is.
I unmuted myself. I don't know why.
Take the power.
Whatever. I'm technologically challenged. I'm on the Kansas state committee for what reopening schools is going to look like as a preschool teacher. And we are tasked right now with looking at different learning styles, whether it be PBL, whether it be co-teaching, whether it be a blended, and coming up with ideas on how to implement that so that we have that document in place and ready to go depending on what COVID does. So that's what we're doing right now. We have the month of June, and then it goes to an oversight committee. And so by the time school starts, we will have a document, a plan with resources in place for what we're doing in Kansas. Yeah,
and just
right there with you. That's like a lot of work.
And do you feel like that document reflects the necessary time for connecting and healing and SEL work and regulation?
Yeah, our commissioner is so fabulous.
Yeah, you guys have a rare commissioner. If you guys don't know the commissioner of education for Kansas, he's amazing. I was like, in Kansas? What the heck? Like, they're doing all sorts of revolutionary stuff with his leadership.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
He said, and I quote, "I believe that every child under the age of 8 should have a play-based education." I'm like, oh, you are my breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
But what?
You should be the president.
Right? But, for a long time, well, because Hutchinson, I live in Hutchinson, and Hutchinson is the home of the Kansas State Fair. So, and that's always the first 2 weeks in September. So, because school starts and we should have a fair in town. But I always use that first 6 weeks at least, depending on my class, but no less than 6 weeks, to build that classroom community, to build those relationships with my kids. And that's when I do my whole fairy tales unit, because I don't think kids get that from their parents anymore. And I know that now because when we were doing distance learning, I know that my kids were just handed the phone and go, "Here, Mrs. Jenkins is reading you a story." They didn't sit down, because I was modeling how to, ask questions or predict an outcome or whatever. And I thought that, the parents would be in on that. No, just hand the phone to the kid and listen to me read a story instead of seeing how I modeled that. But we do a whole lot of just relationship building. We use conscious discipline. And so my kids know that on Monday we do this I love you ritual from conscious discipline. Tuesday's a different one. Wednesday's another one. They'll be like, oh, it's we wish you well day. And so then they learn by the days of the week even which strategy we're doing. And then also my special helper each day picks a kind of a centering mindfulness activity. I have them on a ring and they just flip through them and they pick one that they like. So we start every single day with an I love you ritual and a mindfulness, calming, centering, come back to, we're done with all the hoopla before school, whatever happened at home. You're in the classroom now and we're ready to focus. But I usually do that for 6 or 8 weeks.
That's awesome.
And it's been phenomenal.
Yeah. And Dale and I actually connected last week, or this week, it's all blending together. Outside of these conversations, because in BC, they opened up their schools for the end of the year for, like, Dale, I think you said 3 weeks before they take summer break, and they kind of wanted to see what it was like to go back. I know, Dale, it's still March, right? And so we had a really interesting conversation around, because they just jumped in. Like, they didn't do any of this, and that's kind of why we were talking, is what has that been like for them and the staff. And they have, I don't know, out of 1,400 kids, I think, he said they had like 100 kids at school or something. So it wasn't comfortable. People didn't feel safe. Teachers are stressed out for their own health. There's still some teachers that aren't coming to the building. He was the only counselor in the building. There's just a lot without taking it was like a window into, the kind of the downside. If we don't do this when we go back, his school is experiencing these challenges right now. So this is what we we just had like a brainstorm session around one, kind of what their experience has been, what resources have been helpful, how, what kind of resources can we share, and how might they go back to school differently in, once the summer is off and they really start again. But it was interesting to me that they decided to go back for these like 3-4 weeks. So just putting that out there, that's been their experience so far, and how can we avoid that for our own districts, and how can we help? Any thoughts there, Emily?
Sorry, I've been distracted because I've been trying to find that article that I had told you about from earlier.
Oh, right.
Just to, because I think it really speaks to what I see in some of I went back and read all the chats and what I see Janice asking about and others just commenting on. I think it's a very valid concern. So I wanted to see if I could find that article again.
I think Sungi has a question while you're looking, Emily.
Awesome. Good. I can't see everybody at once.
Go ahead. You, Sungi.
I just wanted to share that, in California, we have a document called Stronger Together that was put out by California Department of Education. And there's a whole section on mental health and well-being. And I haven't finished reading it all yet, but it does start out with the whole notion of adult SEL and staff relationships. So the approach that we're taking in the district that I work in is we're leveraging our crisis response protocol. So we're treating this like a critical incident. So the ongoing pandemic of COVID-19, the ongoing pandemic of the racial movement, right? What's going on in terms of the protests. We are putting together a collective recovery type process where we're building video support as well as discussion support to encourage our site administrators and our district administrators to intentionally create that space and place for people to have some recovery time for the adults, right, before the kids come, and to have these conversations. So we're kind of discussing, and then what we're doing is we're putting together professional learning on what trauma-informed lens means and trauma-informed practices. And Laura and Emily, just want to thank you guys because the free webinars that through Emote as well as the trauma conference really helped me and my team like shape that. So we're putting.
I was just going to say something. I was going to say, like, that's amazing. Like, great work. Where did who did that? And it's you. That's fantastic. Like, it's so I can't even. That probably makes Lara's heart sing as much as mine.
Totally.
You know what I mean? I'm like, you guys are geniuses. How'd you think of that? Like,
Well,
it's so great. I'm so
there's
glad.
a lot of thinking came from what you guys talked about, right? And so
I know, but you ran with it and did something with it. And now you've structured something, which is amazing.
I mean, then the challenge is really kind of like the rollout, right? Is we were talking about, because in a critical response, so when we talk about critical response and critical incidents, it's like, you know, a student completes suicide or something happens with a staff member. And then we have our mental health specialist team. We have a district response team that goes to the school and does this kind of response where we have a conversation with staff. We remind them that they're going through a traumatic experience. What are they feeling physically? What will they feel emotionally? So our recovery like video is following those principles, right? PLES. But one of the things that we talked about is what does it look like in the rollout? Like how do we roll it out so that we don't lose the impact, you know? And we know that when you have like a district team coming into a school site situation, it can change the dynamics of the conversations just because you have somebody from the outside. So we're kind of in conversation about what does that look like? I mean, great, we have this great structure, we have this great ideas, we have support. We're still trying to bridge the gap with curriculum and instruction to make sure that enough time, and that's the challenge too, is this 90-day notion, right? It's, you know, curriculum and instruction is like, hey, we need to go in there and do the pre-assessments and find out where the learning gaps are. And we understand SEL is really important. This is really, we're completely supportive of. And can you do it in a certain number of days? So that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I keep hearing that challenge echoed with you. It's balancing that need for the urgency that some of the curriculum instruction folks feel around the gaps that exist with the student support staff, you know, knowing that none of that's going to happen and none of it matters if we don't address our regulation and connection to community and emotions first. And how do we not have those two sides always kind of at odds with each other or feeling like a conflicted time space.
Okay, excuse me.
Yeah, no problem.
So I mean, that's kind of the approach that we're taking, and so I welcome any suggestions, responses, any ideas that, you know, everyone might have.
Yeah, and you mentioned the document that Adult SEL Stronger Together, right?
Yeah, Stronger Together, it does prioritize the professional relationships between the adults. Our superintendent, Tony Thurman, put that out. And so maybe I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat.
And that's really interesting, using the crisis response policy as your leverage for creating the window, kind of forcing that window open. I like that as a strategy. I see other people are like, okay, getting some ideas. I would love to hear, Peggy, I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. I just know that Kenosha has done so much around this, and you guys are kind of far ahead in your training, even pre-COVID, but from a district perspective, if you have any thoughts, suggestions for people that might be counselors or in roles where they can push this window open wider. Let's see if we can unmute you successfully. All right, Jenna, you want to, there she goes. All right.
There we go. Thanks. So yeah, Kenosha has put together 5 committees to start to come up with a plan for what fall looks like. And so we have one committee that's focused on safety, one that's looking at social emotional learning, one kind of that crisis piece. And when they're looking at that social emotional learning piece, they're looking at the different tiers, keeping it with a trauma lens because of the work we've already done with Jim Sporleader and James Moffat, which is great. And so I also, as part of that, work in a charter school as one of my buildings. And so I'm doing pre-K to 12 currently. Stretches my brain every day. And so that team has been working on the trauma work a little longer than most everybody else. So Pam Black, who has a trauma sensitive education group, she's come in and done a number of presentations for our school as well. And I've worked with Pam for years. She's a wonderful resource if you guys are looking for, yeah, she's just great. So she's going to come back in the fall and work with our building team. But then we are firming up some additional SEL things. Character Strong is what we're looking at going with. And then I just worked with our school secretary to put in an order for the regulated classroom. So we've got a work group. Yes. So stay tuned. You're getting an order for 12 books. So what we've talked about is we need to have things ready to go day one, but we also need to have how we are helping our teachers regulate and provide for their social emotional needs. The other piece of this is our head secretary, who's been with the school since it opened 13 years ago, died a week ago. So we are grieving that loss and knowing that we have to help our staff from that perspective as well. So we have to do the grieving work there, and we have to, and so I have been kind of this gnat in their ear of everything we do must be through trauma and racism focus and that filter. And so that's everything that we're going to do is going to be based on that. So I'm excited.
It's almost like I wish we could take you guys and just bottle you. No, seriously, and get some baseline data, honestly, to see how like, you know, schools that choose not to do that and they just go back and do whatever they're going to do. And then schools who do this, how their outcomes might be different. Like, if there was anybody who's out there who's, you know, of, or is on the call, who's a doctoral candidate.
Needs some work to do.
Project, right?
Go to Kenosha.
Yeah.
Because it's so,
we're excited about how we're
hear, it makes me so proud to hear people who are really taking the information, running with it, and structuring reentry based on it. It's so brilliant. Like, and you guys are doing, you know, you understand your own systems, and so you're shaping it to be reflective of your system, you know, because every system is a little different. So you're doing really pioneering work. You guys should feel really good about yourselves. It's amazing. I can't wait to hear more.
And I, speaking of Pam, reminded me, so I am on a work group with Pam and Eric Rossen from the National Association of School Psychologists and a few other folks, the principals. We are developing a survey. I think Pam has joined this conversation before, and we were talking about the need for a survey around how people are feeling about return and what they need. So what do our teachers need? What do our parents need? What do our students need? So all 3 lenses of kind of surveys to get out there. And we weren't finding what we needed. There was some examples here and there of like bits and parts of what we needed. So this work group that she put together is creating those surveys as we speak. So it's like in my email box
draft this morning.
To look at the draft. Exactly. Like I'm supposed to review the draft and work on it. So, but it's going to be shared freely, widely with everybody. So once we're happy with the draft, hopefully even by next week, or the week after for sure, it's something that I can share with this group for you guys all to take to your districts and share. Because that's really, you know, one of the one of the hopes that I have for this group. Not only do we keep dreaming about what education will look like on the other side, fixing all the things that weren't working because we're going to solve all the problems, but also being a resource for each other because there's so much knowledge in the room here. I feel like, you know, we have a lot to learn from each other, and we just want to facilitate that. There's not that many spaces where we can bring this many educators together, you know, regardless of your role, from all over the country and the world, to really keep sharing all of this stuff with each other. So that's my primary goal, whatever rabbit hole we end up down each time. Any other thoughts, Emily? Anything bubbling up for you?
Well, I see, I don't know if she wants to chime in, but I see Adriana's comment here about she's talking about inclusion. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that and her thoughts of that if she wants to share. She's chatted in a few more times.
Great.
Sweet, go ahead.
Hold on.
Okay.
Gotta unmute. Can you unmute? Wait, you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? Wait. Unmute. See if you can unmute yourself now.
Right, okay.
There you go.
Okay, I'm there. Okay, so basically I think we seem to be focusing a lot on racism, and I understand that racism is one of the problems, but there are so many other people who are marginalized, and if we focus on racism itself, we're focusing on one little part of it, when actually it's inclusion that we should be focusing on, about bringing people together. And I say that because my mother is Māori and my father is Dutch, and there we have the bringing together of two different cultures, and there is a lot of times where I feel torn between which way to go. And I hear my Māori side say, you know, up in arms, and I can understand what they're saying, but I can also hear my father, who is from Holland and from Netherlands, and there's a divide, and I'm in the middle. I'm not the divide. And when people say, you know, these things about being, you know, about racism and colonial, you know, being colonial and stuff like this, I'm thinking to myself, hey, what about those disabled people? What about those children with disabilities? What about their voice? And there are many of those, and really at the bottom of our heap in New Zealand are those children who are Māori, disabled, can't speak, can't talk. They are the ones that need to rise to the top. So it's inclusion that we should be talking about, not racism. And there's such a focus on racism at the moment. But basically, if we were all inclusive, racism, that would cover racism. You know what I'm saying? It's like, then we include everyone, not just people of colour and people who are white and who are brown, and all of us in the middle who are mixed. There's so many mixed half castes, we're called. You know.
Adriana, where are you from? Your accent is awesome. Are you Australian or New Zealand?
New Zealand.
Oh, don't call me Australian. New Zealand.
New Zealand? Oh my gosh, your
New
accent's
Zealand.
phenomenal. I love it. I love listening.
So it's Friday morning for her. Very early.
It is Friday morning. But
Seriously?
yeah.
Wow, you're amazing.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. So I think I think we're all sort of still at this moment in time trying to determine the language of all of this. You know, you're using the language of inclusion, which I don't know what the history of that in New Zealand is. There's a pretty strong history, special education history of the word inclusion here, and so it connotes certain things. Maybe I think what I hear you describing, what it sounds like to me, is equity, and using an equity lens, which I know is a lens that's been part of trauma-informed work, but I think it's getting a new it's getting a new surge of interest. So, but I think your point is well stated in that we are very much, this is an emerging circumstance, and we're trying to determine how to talk about it, how to think about it, and then how to incorporate it, so that we don't unintentionally create unintended consequences that would actually make matters worse for some, potentially, or not resolve the issue itself. So
one of the things, go ahead.
Trying to not getting too, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is what I'm
And
saying.
what came to mind, I had shared this interview somewhere in San Francisco when they decided that their grading policy would be to give everybody all A's. There was a lot of backlash against that. And they did a great interview with Dr. Duncan Andrade. If you don't know his work, please look him up. He's amazing. And they did an interview with him, and he was like, he had this phrase that really stuck with me, that we need to make our policies proximate to the pain. If we are making policies based on those in pain, whatever that looks like, right, that it benefits everybody. That even well-intentioned, we can make policy that we think is doing well, it's going to help, but because we don't understand the pain that our students are experiencing or our families are experiencing, we may actually unintentionally do harm. And so that we need to live proximate to the pain in some way. How we get experience, we need to go hang out with our kids in their neighborhood, we need to go do home visits, we need to get to know families better, we need to share that experience so that then our policies really reflect what those that are struggling the most need, and then everyone will benefit. I'm going to type his name. He's an academic from San Francisco. So that kind of doctor, right? The PhD kind. He has a great TED Talk. He's had lots of articles. He's started a school, but he's very radical and very awesome. Duncan Andrade. Make sure. Oops, I can't spell when I'm talking also. Andrade. Okay, that should be right. He has a school called Roses and Concrete in Oakland, and there's just a lot to learn from that. But I just really appreciated that interview because that really stuck with me. Like, no matter what we're talking about here, if we consider the practices and policies that we develop when we go back to school as benefiting those that are struggling the most, whether it's equity in online learning or, connecting or, any of this stuff, if we make our policies proximate to those that are struggling the most, it will help everybody. Yeah, so I yes, check him out. And then Sungi, what did you put down there? Oh, a guide from Castle, measuring. Excellent. Thank you for the resources. Yeah, feel free to just dump resources in the chat. We save our chat. You can, I think, also save the chat. I'm never quite sure. Yes, Peggy, you're nodding your head. Okay. Other thoughts, questions, ponderings, ideas? One of the, I tweet randomly and often. Sometimes I get no response, sometimes I get a lot. This week, I tweeted a thread about decolonizing our curriculum. So again, I was thinking about that divide that happens between this work on trauma and SEL and curriculum instruction, right? Like, oh, thank you, Emily, for putting his TED Talk in the chat. Yeah. That I feel like this is the work for a lot of what I do is translating. Like, we've got student supports over here, even pre-COVID, right? We've got student supports talking about the importance of being trauma-informed and SEL and regulation and emotion. And then teachers and curriculum instruction over here with all the pressures they have to get kids caught up and raise their reading, grade levels and get kids caught up to where they need to be. and that's what they're held accountable for. That's what their jobs rest on, is their ability to do that. And they often, for me, I can clearly see the connection between the two. To get one, you must do the other. But so how do we bridge that divide and keep that conversation going? And that, to me, this was just like another iteration of that. When I'm talking about, I think this came up earlier in our conversation about like the political, people think this is political, but it's not. I was a US history teacher. I was taught history. And so when I'm teaching history, if I teach a full history, I'm not being political. I'm teaching what happened. So me teaching my students, my high school students, about the Tulsa race massacre and Black Wall Street, people will be like, you're indoctrinating them into the liberal, way of thinking, or no. But our textbooks leave out a primary part of most of our history. And so that was what started my Twitter rant this weekend. But I was amazed and happy about the response that came. I was very surprised, because usually that conversation doesn't resonate for people, or they can't, it's again like this, they can't see that connection between, if trauma informed means that we have empowerment and voice and choice, and that we have awareness, remember, think of the 6 pillars, and we have awareness of cultural, historical, gender issues and trauma, then our curriculum must reflect that. So those in curriculum instruction not only need to understand the importance of emotional regulation, but they must understand how their curriculum is trauma informed by what is shared and what it reflects. And so now I'm going to write a whole blog about it.
Yeah, and I was just going to also remind you before our time is over that we were going to maybe touch upon the whole notion of SROs in the school.
Oh gosh.
An article written in the LA Times, it was written last month, about sort of the impact of all of this on student mental health, and how when kids return to school, there are insufficient resources, mental health resources, which I actually would argue with that. People, and that's not just for the sake of argument. I say that only because I think that all we need to be is adults that care about kids, and we'll do a lot. We can be very therapeutic without being therapists, is my point with that. But I do think that for those schools, because you've told me in LA how like really under-resourced many of your districts are, or schools rather, that are part of the LA Unified School District, one part-time social worker for a school of 1,600 kids, or one counselor for 3 schools or something, just like really crazy. So in that way, I think that's an interesting concept too. About, I'd seen something, it might have been in Washington State, about districts deciding that they're going to shift their spending on SROs to social work, counselors, other support, mental health support personnel. And so I'm curious if anybody had any thoughts about that, or if what people are thinking about that. And because I think that's a really robust conversation as well.
Oh my God, that's what I mean. We were struggling not with like having nothing to talk about, but so much to talk about in the last week, because that was, I don't know. I'm asking Jenna if she can, hold on. There's a great report by the ACLU called Cops and No Counselors. That was done last year, I believe, outlining the recommended staffing levels for schools in terms of counselors and social workers, and that most of our schools don't come anywhere near meeting that threshold, but they have, and I can't even remember all the exact numbers, but how many children go to schools with cops and no counselors. And so I am not across the board completely anti-SRO. I've seen it work well, but I am also very aware of the visual, Emily talks a lot about cues of safety in the polyvagal theory, right? What makes us feel safe. And sometimes things that are put there to make us feel safe actually cue us to feel unsafe. And so a lot of our Black and brown students in LA, when they go into a school building and see a uniformed police officer there, even if it's someone that's from the neighborhood. It's the uniform itself, and they're there to police them, and they know that. They know that those people are there to police their bodies in a school setting and makes them feel unsafe. So I mean, LAUSD has given their SROs trauma-informed training. They've done a lot of nonviolent communication training with them, all well-intentioned. Yet that is still the experience, if we're talking about youth voice, from a lot of kids that feel that their presence makes them feel unsafe. So, and then I've had other schools that have had amazing, because they've had the right SRO, it's an amazing human that connects with kids, that supports everybody, the kids that are gang related love him, talk to him, he keeps them connected. So I've seen it play out in so many different ways, but for me, it's more about this report about how we use our funding. We, one of the school districts from my hometown, the school district there, their union put out a statement saying, yes, we support ending the contract with the police department in our schools, but only if you fund all the counselors and social workers that is, stated in the ACLU report. You can't just leave teachers with no support. So anyway, this could be a conversation all on its own.
I just pulled up those stats for you. They're kind of overwhelming, actually, if you look at them. If people see, 1.7 million students are in schools with police but no counselors, 3 million with police but no nurses, 6 million with police but no school psychologists, 10 million with police but no social workers. I mean, that's, those are some significant numbers. And then you have 14 million students in schools with police but no counselor, no nurse, no psychologist or social worker.
Right. And budgets are moral documents. So, I think we talked about this last week, right? It shouldn't also have to be an either or, it should be both and. And as much as we can advocate at the policy level, like this, I kept putting this report back up on my page in my tweet, even though it's from like last year, the year before, right? Because that's what we need to fund. If people want to see different outcomes, we have to fully support. Like Emily said, I always tell her these stories. I'm in schools with, 1,800 kids, and they've got a social worker 2 days a week. The hell are you supposed to do with that, right? Like if you have a meltdown on a Tuesday and no one's there, the teachers and administrators are left to reconcile that, and they have no training. So there's so much that needs to be changed in how we decide where our funding goes. So thoughts, welcome, ranting, ramblings, and I'll just be mindful it's 12:52, so there's just a lot going on this week. I'm just looking at the chat here.
I'll have to read that report because I'm curious to see what it says statistically speaking about what have been the levels of juvenile incarceration and/or have we seen an influx of juveniles being processed through the justice system at the time when we were having a lot of police presence in schools? Like, what's the relationship there?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I agree with what people are saying, and this isn't, I'm not intending to vilify the police. Right. I have a phenomenal chief of police in our little town. I absolutely love him. And to me, he is like the model of community policing. And I think that's, what I personally, I'm not saying that I think we should get rid of the police. I'm just saying that I think we need to train them differently. And, but what I've seen personally in schools when I worked in schools is that a lot of our youth who struggled behaviorally, most of whom were either children of color or children that were poor, they ended up fast-tracked in the system. They had charges, they came out of high school with charges, which made it hard, even if those charges, didn't result in any kind of maybe it was a no contest kind of thing. The first thing they do when they go to sign up for a job or to, complete a job application is right there. Like, have you ever been charged with a crime? And so like from the get-go, it just was making things that much harder for them. So I would be curious to see what is the relationship between those two things.
Adriana, you're going to make us all want to move to New Zealand. Oh, Jacqueline, let's see if we can unmute you. And you might need to unmute yourself. Hold on. Jenna, are you able to? Okay, can you unmute yourself, Jacqueline? There you go. You're good. Yep.
Okay. We went through a transition a few years ago here in Sandusky, and the outcome of that is I'm the mental health therapist in the building full time. They didn't contract the position out. They actually hired me to be in the building. So our middle school and our high schools are connected together. So I can go back and forth between the two buildings. I also consult with the school counselors in our elementary buildings. And we have a pretty good relationship with our SRO and the principals. And it took a lot of time to build that to where if there is a student that is acting out or escalating, they can actually opt out and ask to see a counselor or see me before any discipline is administered. Again, it took a lot of fighting and going back and forth and advocating and being very vocal and really speaking up for students because our suspension rates were through the roof. And so the state started looking at those numbers. And when the state starts to look at those numbers and say, hey, why is it that kids are being suspended for the same things, then it forces change. And that's what happened. It's not a perfect system. It's getting better. Sometimes there is pushback. Sometimes I still get a little frustrated. But our SRO, our police department have been so supportive. They've been at every single one of our marches and protests that we've had. Very visible in the crowd, clapping, walking, shouting as loud as the rest of us. So we're a small community, and it's easier, I think, in a smaller community to get that collaboration and kind of that more cooperative feel. But I wouldn't do anything else. People wonder why I'm a mental health therapist in a school. I wouldn't do anything else. Kids need a voice, and that's what we're here for. We are their voices because no one else is going to speak up for them. And yeah,
I love that.
They have behaviors, but where did the behavior come from? They didn't just wake up one day and go like, oh, I'm going to go to school and throw a desk today. There is something behind that. And my job, I feel, is to find out what is behind that. And yeah, there's a discipline that comes with the act, but can we temper the discipline when we understand what was the cause or what was the underlying reason?
Oof, there's so much in what you just said. I love it. That's so rich. And it's like, it came up in our chat. Someone else, I can't even see where now, mentioned like mental health issues and behavior and discipline are all like, they're so conjoined and intertwined. And before discipline, having that conversation around what's going on and what do they need. And, like you said, they didn't just come to school and decide to flip a desk. And that every time Emily and I do a conference or a learning, this conversation around discipline and behavior and control and response and suspension and rules is really at the center of the struggle for so many districts, that concept. So I love to hear what you did.
There was also a comment that was in there related to exactly this. Where was it? I'm trying to find the person. I had their name and then I just went. But she was asking about, how do you get mental health clinics in schools? So I was going to make two comments about that just because that's kind of your wheelhouse too, Laura.
Yep.
Because SAMHSA has, I don't know what, is it Penny who said this? I don't know who said it. Maybe the person who said it could unmute themselves, but
It was Penny.
it was Penny? Okay, I don't know if she wants to speak out loud, but I don't know what state she's in, but depending on what state she's in, she may be
There
in a
she
state
is.
that- Okay,
Yeah,
good.
do you want to, can you unmute
There,
her?
I think I'm
Hi.
unmuted.
Yep, you are.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm in Spokane, Washington. Our school is a neighborhood school with Gonzaga, and we've been trying to like get grants, but because we're working with Gonzaga, they're saying Gonzaga can afford it. They should be able to do it for us. But the other side of our state has them. We can't get them on the east side. I don't know.
Yeah.
And we're our first school to ask. So.
Yeah, I'll keep my eyes open, and all the community schools work that I did in Los Angeles prior to this work was around a lot of that, like connecting partnerships, schools with their local community health clinics and building partnerships.
Yeah, we've gone through Kaiser, I think we've a couple different times, and they keep turning us down. So
okay,
we're not done trying.
Keep at it. Keep at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, everyone. It is 1 o'clock and time to go. But I love, like, save the chat if you haven't. We'll save it. If you didn't save it and you like, oh my God, I want it, you can just email me. I'll put my email if I can type and talk. Hold on 1 second. You can email me, and we'll be at it again next week. And like I said, and if I have any updates on who the special guest is next week or the topic, I'll put that in the weekly blog. The blog for this should be up every Monday now on the ACEs in Education page, and I usually tweet it out as well. And then on June 25th, we're going to focus on youth voice with my guest, Roberto Rivera. And yeah, onward. So I wish you all a good week, and I hope you are well, and I look forward to next time. Thanks, guys, for joining me today.
It was fun. Thanks for inviting me. Bye.
Bye, everyone.